Well, the Steinway was 1924. The other piano is a Mason and Hamlin. It's 1929, and playing an Ampico system. Ampico was made starting from around 1915 onward to 1929 as the Model A. And in 1929, just before the Depression, they changed it over to a new system which they called the Model B. This Mason and Hamlin is a Model B piano, 1929, and it's Louis XV style in walnut, and it's one of 210 pianos made after 1929, so it's a pretty rare instrument, and the fact that it's a Louis XV cabinet makes it even more rare. It still has the original finish, which was cleaned up and recoated so as not to lose the what they call edge shading, whereas it highlights certain aspects of the carving, and most people do not take the time to recreate those subtle changes in the coloring of the carving. So it's pretty much the way it looked originally, and everything else, the restringing and the repairs to the piano action were done to make it as new again.
Can you tell us a little bit about the condition that you received the piano in, and what all you had to do to bring it back to the quality that we see it in today?
Well, this piano wasn't anywhere near as rough as the Steinway. It was pretty well cared for and kept in a home up until the point at which I bought it. The finishes do suffer because people usually stick one end or the other piano in the sunlight from a window, so that part fades. But in redoing the exterior, that was corrected, and so it has its original shading and like I said, the new strings, pins, and sounding board work plus action work, new hammers, pretty well make it a new piano again. The player system was similarly restored. Everything that moves was recovered, and all new tubing replaced. The Model B is supposed to be the ultimate in the player system. Although I've had 4 or 5 reproducing pianos lined up in my store, and I would challenge people to tell me whether that was an Ampico A, B, Welty, DuoArt, or whatever, and it's pretty much impossible if you can't look at the piano and see what it actually is. They all do the same basic job.
Now, can somebody buy Ampico A rolls and put them on an Ampico B piano?
The rolls are actually interchangeable. There's 2 extra perforations in a B roll, which give you an extra level of softness. The high volume pretty much stays the same, but they're called sub-expression holes, and they will take it one level softer than the usual minimum. So in that case, it can do a little more than an Ampico B, but again, there's basically an infinite adjustment of the volume that's possible from very soft to very loud. And I have to say that probably most people listening to one are not involved sufficiently to be able to tell what exactly the piano is doing, besides a good reproducing job. You can't tell one shade of expression from the other until it builds up to the point where the human ear can differentiate the volume.
Can you talk a little bit about how these pianos were used in the home prior to the advent of radio and television? Nowadays, these are really museum pieces, and you talked about how the piano may be played once a year, Christmas to Christmas. How did this instrument, how was it used in the home in, say, circa 1920?
Well, from there and older, there were limited possibilities for entertainment in the home, and unless you played the piano or some other instrument, the only thing you had was singing. And so phonograph records did exist, but they were so bad as far as quality goes, that you couldn't tell a piano from a xylophone. So that made it interesting to me, because the finest pianists of the period were doing everything they could to get their performances recorded on player piano rolls, so that succeeding generations would know exactly what they could do, as opposed to just a verbal history. And so you have the finest musicians in the world at your fingertips, and particularly on the reproducing pianos. Um, Most pianos, I believe, of the period were used a lot, because that was the main entertainment. People would come over on weekends or Saturday night and have a sing fest or whatever, and the pianos did get used. Now today may be a little different, because there's so many different ways you can entertain yourself in the home, but back then this would have been the major thing in the house, and so the use was much greater. And the fact that the artists and their capabilities are what attracted me to the reproducing piano, and changed my interest from popular to classical music, because now you could hear it played the way someone actually would play it. So that's what got me into reproducing pianos. I still enjoy pumping 88-note rolls, because there's music on those that you will not find on a reproducing piano, but and it's more participation. You can try to recreate the way the song would be emphasized by just how you pump it. And so it depends on your interest in music as to what kind of a player piano you should consider owning.
Now, I noticed in my own work with these piano rolls that a lot of the old antiques have prices of $1 and $1.50 and $1.25. What was any individual, were these priced, from moderate all the way up to, luxury grade, or was this something that lots of people had in their homes, or was this more of a, middle upper class, this was a luxury good?
Well, the very low end of affordability, people would have been buying an old pump organ or something, because those were in the $85 range to $100. Of course, there were fancier or cheaper models, but whereas a piano might be starting at $300-400 and going on up to $1,500 at the time, which would have been a Cadillac, really. The player grands mostly went from $3,000 to $8,000. So if you convert $1920 into today's figures, that's probably $120,000-140,000.
So these reproducing pianos were really a very expensive item in the day, and they were not, attainable by just everybody on the street.
Well, the very finest pianos, like the Mason and Hamlin or the Steinway, were at the upper end of that tier. So they would have been, $8,000 to $12,000, and the standard players would have been. There was an intermediate grade of player grand, which would have been the middle section from $3,000 to $5,000, and then the uprights, a reproducing upright would have been $2,000 to $3,000, and then you got down to the foot pumping pianos, which were the least expensive was like $350 to $625 in that company, which was Gulbranson. And they actually made a very fine piano compared to some of the other less expensive pianos. Quality work, but there were cheap pianos and there were good pianos and there were excellent, just like there are today.